Thank you, Chair. Welcome back, Mr. Giroux, Ms. Vanderwees. It's always good to have you at committee. And appreciate much of the work that your office does to support parliamentarians. I know those of us who do not have large departments or staffs rely on your work on a regular basis, and it's very high quality. You mentioned in the supplementary estimates, and I know we're spending more per year on debt servicing costs than we have in the past, almost double, in fact. I'm a little nervous about the projections that the government has for debt servicing costs because there was a surprise interest rate increase announcement last week. And I believe the government's projections are that rates were supposed to have come down by the end of the year. I haven't been able to find the average interest rate that the government expects to roll over or issue its debt at for this year coming up. I'm wondering, have you considered or are you tracking the debt service cost because it's now one of the largest components of the spending line?
It is indeed one item of expenditure that we are closely tracking because it matches obviously very closely interest rate variations. And with the Bank of Canada having increased recently its interest rate once again, this will quite obviously have an upward impact on the debt servicing costs. However, that impact will not be immediate. Well, some of it will be immediate because the government finances itself through treasury bonds or treasury bills, but also bonds that have various length of maturity. So we will be following the impact on debt servicing costs closely, but we expect this to have an upward impact on debt servicing costs compared to what was laid out in the budget, where I don't think people had anticipated the bank to increase its rate to what it is right now.
And do you recall what the debt servicing cost number is for this year? It's about 40?
Not off the top of my head. It's in the vicinity of $43 billion, I think.
That's right. Just want to thank you for answering that question. Sometimes it's very hard to get answers to factual questions like that, so I appreciate it. It's about $43.9 billion, which is actually quite close to what we're transferring to the provinces for healthcare this year. So that expenditure, any upward revision, is going to make it harder to pay for some social programs, I think. Just want to turn now to some of your other work, everybody's favorite topic, carbon pricing. So you did the fuel charge distributional analysis. You also did the basically the clean fuel standard distributional analysis. Just want to get some impacts on kind of price per liter when it's fully implemented. So the federal carbon charge or what we're calling the fuel charge, when fully implemented, how much is that per liter?
I think the estimate at this time is that by 2030, when the carbon tax, the price per ton amounts to $170, that will be about 40 cents per liter. I think 41 cents is the number.
Okay. And the clean fuel standard, is that about 17 cents a liter?
Yeah, based on the government's own estimates, it should be about 17 cents per liter for gasoline and 16 cents per liter for diesel.
Right. And if you take those two together and we apply HST, which is what happens at the end of the bill, it's about 61 cents per liter. Is that around right if you're in Ontario?
It's an order of magnitude. I wouldn't add them together personally. There could be some interaction impacts between clean fuel regulations and the carbon tax, but that would be quite close to the number you mentioned.
Okay. And then in terms of the cost to an average family, so think about Ontario for a moment, that's where I'm from, the federal carbon charge, once fully implemented, net cost is about $1,820. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Okay. And the clean fuel standard, net cost, once fully implemented, about $495?
Yep.
Okay. Total about just over $2,300 once fully implemented is?
Yeah, for an average household, on average, in Ontario. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. We spend a fair bit of time arguing about regulation versus carbon pricing versus, other actions the government can take. Most governments are either doing a carbon price or regulations, but our government's chosen to do both. How should we think about the impact that these measures are actually going to have on emissions?
Well, that's a good question. So when we look at the clean fuel regulations, they're expected by the government's own estimate to reduce emissions by 26 million tons of CO2 equivalent in 2030. That's the stated impact based on the government's own estimate. The carbon tax itself will also have an impact, and I don't remember off the top of my head the exact number, but the point is that whether it's a carbon tax or regulations, both have a cost. It's a matter of how obvious and transparent the cost is.
Appreciated all the questions and the discussion back and forth about the carbon tax. I'll continue on just for a moment. Farmers or businesses in general don't receive a rebate, correct? And one of the groups that is heavily affected are farmers. And so I appreciate this discussion about, who's really, which families are being impacted. But it seems to me that whether you consider farms as providing a significant subsidy for the funding that happens for the rebates, it's actually quite substantial, including those families who happen to live in rural parts of the country who have, different lifestyle, different impacts, different choices of vehicle, for example. Is that like a fair? Right.
A statement. That's a fair statement of facts.
Right. And I certainly appreciate the trying to quantify the costs of doing nothing, however that would look, in a model. But there's also a point about, like, what's Canada's contribution or pro rata contribution to that cost, right? Which isn't a full, we're not responsible for all of the climate change effects that happen in the world, correct? So, we can't all of a sudden take 100% of the costs and say that we're going to solve it by implementing policies that will affect about, 2% of emissions? Is that?
To one other difficulty, in my opinion, of costing a scenario where we do nothing. Whether it's Canada who does nothing and is a free rider and lets other countries do their own emissions reduction, or whether it's the entire world doing nothing, which is a catastrophic scenario. So that leads to various different hypotheses and assumptions. Whether we take Canada as a free rider, in that case, there would be a cost, but it would probably be much more than economic. It would be diplomatic, it would be commercial. So there are various considerations that become very tricky and delicate in estimating a scenario where we do nothing.
The Bank of Canada produced a report last year that said the carbon tax in general added about 0.5 point to inflation. Would it be safe to assume that since the clean fuel standard also impacts the price of fuel and energy, which is one of the more significant contributing components of inflation, that it will be inflationary to some degree?
Yes, to the extent that energy and gasoline and diesel are part of the consumer price index. If you increase one of the components of the CPI, it increases, although marginally, but it increases inflation.
Okay, thank you. I want to pick up on my colleague, Mr. Perkins, just for a minute. We don't know the spending profile for the Volkswagen contract, correct?
Mm-hmm.
We will eventually know the spending profile because it'll show up in the public accounts.
Yes.
Do you have an idea why the government thinks it's commercially sensitive today, but that'll eventually not be commercially sensitive when we will all find out?
No, I don't know. Maybe it's because of it involves maybe secrets or commercially sensitive information when it comes to ramping up or the capacity of a business to ramp up production and then sales of electric vehicles, but I don't know.
Okay. 30 seconds. Quick question. If the government is banning petrol vehicles, what's the point of the carbon tax?
That's a good question. I think it's to reduce the use that would be made of fossil fuels, gas, gasoline, diesel, for cars that will still be on the road, and heating systems and industrial processes.
But over time, with the ban, we would get rid of them.
Of cars, but maybe not of other uses.
Thank you.